Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm very pleased to have with me as my guest Shahram Seyedin-Noor, who's a partner and founder of Civilization Ventures, a venture capital firm. Shahram, welcome to the program.
Great to be here, Richard. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Shahram, I invited you today because you, like myself, were a former lawyer. Maybe start by telling me what led you or what drew you into the legal profession to begin with.
Sure. Well, I came to this country as an immigrant. My family escaped Iran after the revolution there that turned Iran into a theocratic dictatorship. And so we came to America in 1982. Once we came to America, we ended up eventually in Portland, Oregon, where I was raised. And growing up, I read a lot. As you know, I have an identical twin brother, so we were together reading a lot. And a lot of my heroes growing up were actually lawyers. Whether it was Mahatma Gandhi or activists like Ralph Nader, Abraham Lincoln. A lot of the leaders that I admired had law degrees. And my brother and I in particular used to be intellectual kind of thinking partners. We used to read a lot of books and share our thoughts together. And in that kind of reading about politics and about society also led me to believe that that world of governance and politics and law would be one that I could find myself working in. So that was the impetus for why I pursued law, or rather why I was always thinking of law early in my life as one of the career options. It's also an obvious career option. If you're coming as an immigrant, you and I were talking about this earlier, kind of the options on the menu for what's considered successful are things like being a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer.
Yeah.
And those were the options that I had. Except for engineering, I was never that interested in being like an engineer per se, although my grandfather was one. But for me, when I was graduating from high school, I think there were three options that we were asked to rank three options, kind of career trajectories that we had in mind when I was a senior. And I remember writing down, I actually had a piece of paper, I think I wrote down doctor, geneticist, lawyer, not necessarily in that order. So those were the three things that I had in my mind, even in high school. Loved biology, was my favorite of all, like the 10 or 12 AP courses I took. I really thought biology was kind of one of the most interesting. Had always had an abiding interest in law and governance and politics, and medicine, was always on the table. It was only until I went to college and was a pre-med that I realized I didn't like being in a lab. I couldn't see myself as a chem major. I also visited hospitals and never liked being in a hospital, maybe for good reason. It's usually not a good sign when you're there, but I just didn't like the ambiance. And so kind of knew, I'm not going to end up in medicine because I don't like being in hospitals. But at the same time, in college, I fell in love with econ and became an econ major. And then the next logical thing was to apply to law school. But then again, once I went into law school, I realized I kind of didn't want to do traditional legal work either. And the itch that I had, at least me, not my twin brother, who was a very successful lawyer in the Bay Area, but for me, the itch that I had around curiosity for law and governance was a little bit more academic and a little bit less career. And that's why I pivoted away.
Yeah, interesting. Well, tell me about that pivot. I mean, how did you find that opportunity? How did you figure out what to pivot to?
Sure. Well, again, zooming out for a moment, as an immigrant, my parents, neither of my parents went to college, so they had no experience with the U.S. system. And even though my brother and I would, speak with our high school college counselors, as well as our college counselors once we were in college, the guidance was, I would say, limited. And so I kind of saw narrow fields as the options ahead. Like when I was in college, I would, maybe graduate school for medicine or law, so it was law. And I was told not, it was advised by the elders, don't take any time off. That's the worst thing you can do. You may never go back to school. It's very traditional immigrant thinking, which is false. And you should definitely take time off if you can after college to, get some experience in the work world. I did apply for a few consulting jobs in college, and it was a little bit difficult. The school that I went to was not very well connected in Wall Street. I went to Pomona College in Claremont, California, a school that I absolutely love. I think it's probably, in my opinion, if not the best college in the country and the world, certainly one of the top 5. I had an incredible experience there, but it's a smaller school, it's liberal arts, and is not recognized by all the top, Wall Street banks and stuff very much. When I was later at Goldman, I remember making a special effort to recruit top students from Pomona into Goldman because I knew they had a disadvantage to vis-a-vis students at Harvard or Princeton or Yale, other schools. So it was only when I ended up in law school that I really began to understand. Like, I did not think the day-to-day legal profession would be one that I would love. It's ironic. I have an identical twin brother who's genetically identical to me. He loves it. He loves being a litigator. He loves the courtroom. I was never enamored with it. I was much more enamored with the boardroom, and he was enamored with courtroom. So we just had different tastes, I suppose. And I remember being a 1L in law school, thinking I'm going to drop out. Like, I don't see myself doing this.
Yeah.
And you know, I was very, very fortunate to be at Harvard Law School, and I didn't want to squander the opportunity. So instead of dropping out or, you know, getting an MBA or going to Wall Street, I decided to focus on the things in law school that I really, really liked. And in particular, I really liked our classmates. Harvard was filled with absolutely incredible classmates, very talented international students, as well as JDs like us from different parts of the country. So I really, really enjoyed spending time with them. I mean, people, you know, in my section, Alvin Braggs was in my small section who just prosecuted Trump, which, I'm not saying I agree with that prosecution, but, you know, we had that caliber of folks in school, you know, people that have gone on to become senators and congressmen and, you know, leaders. And the international student body was equally impressive. So I focused on things that I loved. I was very involved in a journal called the International Law Journal at Harvard, or the Harvard International Law Journal. Eventually became the editor-in-chief. And honestly, Richard, when I was in law school, I feel like half the time I was just interviewing, because my first year, I was interviewing for international or nonprofit jobs, which are the best ones you can get as a 1L. So I ended up doing human rights work in Argentina for half the summer, which I paid for myself because they didn't pay me anything. That was fun. And my 2L year, I was interviewing with all the Wall Street firms to spend time in New York. Ended up spending time in New York and Germany. I split my summer between international work and finance work in New York. And then my 3L year, when I pivoted to come to Silicon Valley, I interviewed a whole new slew of firms. So as you know, interviewing on the law school campus takes about half your year. So I mean, law school went by like this. When I was there, I decided that I didn't see myself long-term as a lawyer, but it was a strange time. It was 1999 when I graduated. And I was going to graduate with about 100,000 of debt to college and law school. And so the conservative, you know, immigrant thing to do, quote unquote, if I was to characterize it that way, is to graduate, do legal work, pay off your debt, then make the jump to something riskier, which is eventually what I did. But my inspiration, I would say the most inspiring class I had in law school that was in line with my current career path was a course taught by Lawrence Lessig and Jonathan Zittrain. It was actually the first time they were teaching that course in 1998 to 99, and it was called the High Tech Entrepreneur. And it was really like a business school course. It was probably the only course that I took at Harvard Law School, which could have been taught at Harvard Business School. And I loved it. I loved it because, unlike all the other courses, it wasn't, you know, daily theoretical discussions resulting in one exam, which would be your entire grade for the year, for the semester, which is a bizarre way to run law school. I think they've changed it a little bit since then. Not the kind of pedagogy that I thought they should be employing at Harvard Law School at the time. This class was very different. They said, you know, Lawrence Lessig, just to rewind, Lawrence Lessig, very famous lawyer in the world of internet, you know, cyber and legal things pertaining to that. I think he even tried to run for president at one point. He was the special prosecutor for the Microsoft antitrust trial that was going on. And that was happening while he was teaching us. So anytime anyone in class would mention the word Microsoft, he would walk out. And it became a joke. Like, we would deliberately say, "What about Microsoft?" They would say, "Okay, guys." And they would just leave the room and they would come back. But he was tag teaming the course with Jonathan Zittrain, who's right now one of the luminaries at Harvard Law as well, still teaching there in cyber and internet, and just incredible teacher. Jonathan Zittrain was this young guy. I think he might have been in his 20s, and, you know, and I was 24 at the time. So these guys, that was one of my favorite courses because the assignment was start a company. They taught some stuff around law, and, you know, internet was pretty new back then. This is 1998. So and the dot-com boom was just gathering steam, and I was, you know, destined to go to Wilson Sonsini. I'd already gotten my offer, so it was the perfect class for me. But as I did the class, I realized I was going to be an entrepreneur, because that's I just saw myself doing that. And in particular, in this class, I teamed up with two of my classmates who are buddies of mine, and we started a website to sell art, and we called it Artopa. And, you know, got our website up, started putting works of art up, and got our A in the class, and then the real world started after graduating, and I was like, well, what happened to our TOEFL? We can't continue that. Like, no, I have to go take my bar exam and start work at Wilson Sonsini the Monday after my bar exam. I didn't take any time off. So that gave me a taste of what could be. And of course, within months of me starting work in September of '99, the dot-com bubble predictably burst, and things became much more difficult in terms of the broad variety of options that people had in '98, '97. People starting companies left and right. That all ended, and it was much more of a survival mode for the next few years.
So what was your first opportunity that actually pulled you out of law, or allowed you to leap out of law, I guess is the question?
I mean, I was looking to leap, Richard, immediately. So as soon as I started work at Wilson Sonsini, I knew that I didn't aspire to be a partner there. And so I started working on my own business ideas. At one point, it's kind of funny when I think about it now. I went to one of the partners in my group, and my group was run by the managing partner of Wilson at the time, a gentleman named Alan Austin, who was legendary. And he quit within a year. So when I started there, by September of 2000, he was already gone to go to Accel and become a venture capitalist. That's the environment that we were in back then. And I remember going to one of the partners. I was put onto an ed tech deal, a company that was doing educational online. I think it was called Blackboard, if I'm not mistaken. And I told the partner, I don't think I could work on this. I have my own idea to start an educational company. And I think back to that, and I just think to myself, I was so arrogant and it's foolish. The idea that I'm working at a law firm as a lawyer, and I go to my partner and tell him, can't put me on this one because I might actually start a competitor. It's kind of crazy. And that was the atmosphere back then. And indeed, I did want to do it, but it became clear that if I started a company, I was not going to raise money because all the VCs were shutting down in 2000. All the startups were shutting down. It was a different environment. So, but nonetheless, I continued to interview to leave the legal world. And so by the summer of 2000, things were dismal. No investment bank was hiring, no consulting firm was hiring. I mean, I had multiple rounds of interviews at McKinsey that were going great, but they just weren't going to hire more people. I had the same thing at Goldman, and Goldman actually did end up hiring, which was a little bit strange because, again, the economy was doing very, very poorly. But somehow I got a job at Goldman Sachs to go into their tech group, and that's how I got out.
Okay.
And then it took a few more years before I joined my first startup. I wanted to be very selective. I was very interested in the life sciences, so I looked specifically for companies that were extremely innovative in the healthcare life sciences space. And among those, I was analyzing the ones that would be early stage enough where I could have a lot of responsibility and add something, and where I had a good connection with the founders and where it was bona fide. And the company I found was one called NextBio that I was actually outside counsel to. And the founders were great. One of them was a Stanford professor, still a good friend of mine. And that was a company that I joined. They were gracious enough to let me take on a lot of responsibility as kind of a founding executive, if you will, general counsel, CFO, corp dev, all the titles that I could find. I just kind of took responsibility for in a 3-person team. And then we became a 50, 60-person team by the time it was sold to Illumina.
So when you joined that company as a founder, did it feel much better? Were you much happier than being a lawyer? Like you kind of knew that was your calling of being an entrepreneur?
Yes. Again, to be clear, I wasn't a founder of the company. I called myself a founding executive because they'd already had the idea to do essentially a multi-omic search engine. And they'd already raised the first $1 million in angel capital when I joined. And I actually helped them with all that because I was the outside counsel that put the company together. But when I joined a year later, it was still a 3-person team. It was, hadn't made a little bit of progress. So the real work was ahead of the company. But that was absolutely the first time that I thought, wow, I'm really using all my skills. And I think I was looking for risk as well, Richard. I think for me, the idea of being on a predictable path as a lawyer was not exciting for whatever reason. I just didn't, I can't even explain it. I mean, I think to a certain extent, if one is looking to do something, it's not that you're looking to do that thing per se, it's that you can't imagine not doing it, is what I would say. And so for me, I couldn't imagine not starting a company.
Yeah.
That was and maybe part of it is that my father's an entrepreneur and was, a businessman, and that was something that I had seen before. And part of it, I'm sure, was what's in the water in Silicon Valley, which is everyone is wanting to start a company. You have to be really, really passionate about your career path not to try to do that. And so for me, when I joined that first company, I loved the experience of, I did all the fundraising for it. I put together the deck. I did all the things that you would do as a founder of a company, but I was doing it as, employee number 3. And I loved it. I loved that creation aspect of it. I liked the fact that there was marketing and sales involved. I liked the fact that it was completely dependent on effort, that there was nothing foretold, and that the rewards could be really high if we succeeded. That excited me as well. I think what draws me to the world of entrepreneurship is that there is some risk, and that it's multidimensional and interdisciplinary. You use all your skills. Even today as a VC, we could talk about how I ended up here, a very unexpected, unpredictable path, I would say. But what I like most about it is that one day I'm marketing our firm to founders and creating our website. The next day I'm managing a board meeting and encouraging founders to do X, Y, and Z. Then the next day I'm interfacing with one of my investors and managing the relationship and getting them excited. And then the next day I'm negotiating an acquisition on a board. It's like you do everything in this job, at least when you're the founder of a firm. Certainly if you join a big firm, maybe you don't do anything but just look at deals and due diligence. But for me, this involves all my skills, and that I really enjoy.
Well, I was just going to ask you, so now how do you compare being a venture capitalist with an executive, founder operating role in a company? Do you find they're significantly different? Do you prefer being a venture capitalist than, running a company, operating a company?
Part of it. That's a good question, Richard. It's all part of a continuum of just being a professional, in my mind. Is it that different being like what Larry Sonsini did in creating Wilson Sonsini, one of the world's preeminent law firms in tech and otherwise? He's an entrepreneur. What my brother is doing in building Alto Litigation into the powerhouse boutique and litigation that he's built, he's an entrepreneur. And he's using all the same skills that I mentioned. He's just doing it in a different domain that he enjoys more than what I'm doing. And so I think you use all those skills. It's very multidisciplinary. I happened upon it by process of elimination, I would say. I like being an entrepreneur. I really enjoyed being a founder. I enjoyed being an executive. What I found is that as I was entering my 40s, I thought it was too high risk. So the question I asked myself, Richard, is how can I maintain the upside, excitement, and all the things that I love about being a founder and an executive, but do it in a way where I'm in control of the product? Where I don't need a co-founder who's telling me, this is our product, here's how I'm going to build it, whether they're an engineer or a scientist. And the conclusion I came to is that means that I have to be an investor. It's kind of crazy because that's not how most people become investors. They don't sit around and say, Venn diagram, what do I love? And then they end up with that. But that's what I did. I said, okay, I've been a founder now for 10 years and an executive in companies that have been successful, like NextBio. We sold it to Illumina for a decent amount, and saw the experience from literally from inception and incorporation to raising our last round, that was sold a few years after I left. But I saw that whole journey and have done drug development. I've run software teams. Then I said, what can I do now that's just a different level of that game and gives me more control, more autonomy over my own destiny. Now, that's not to say that venture capital is this predictable path where I can engineer an outcome. Quite the contrary, as you know, venture capital is filled with risk and uncertainty. But at least through things like portfolio construction, the kind of founders we work with, the kind of products we choose to back, we can try to determine a matrix of investments that could hopefully have an outcome, and I can take full responsibility for it. No one can, I don't have a co-founder that can quit their job tomorrow and destroy the company and say, well, I'm not going to code anymore, and we're done. That is a risk you face when you're starting a tech company.
Do you have fun in this job? Do you consider this job a fun job?
I love this job. I love this job, and it doesn't really feel like working to me. To be fair, I haven't felt like I'm quote unquote working since I went to my first company at the age of 32. Because once you're in a startup, it's completely self-driven. No one, even though I was not the CEO of NextBio, no one really told me what to do. In fact, I was always determining what had to be done. I said, we need to go, raise money with this deck. This is the amount we need to raise. This is the valuation I want to raise it at. Then I said, we need to hire this engineer and this engineering lead. Then I was negotiating deal. I was completely autonomous. And that's what I enjoyed about it. And of course, that's just been the case ever since. So I've never really felt like I'm working in the way that I did when I was in law and banking. Even when I was in law and banking, I felt like I was in school to a certain extent because I treated it like an education. I thought, okay, I know that I don't want to end up in the partnership position here necessarily, but what I do know is that I want to learn the skills. I want to be able to leave here and understand the intricacies of acquisitions and financings and doing a spreadsheet for an leveraged buyout or an M&A, which is all the things we learned at Goldman Sachs, and incredibly deep financial analysis. It was almost like working at Wilson Sonsini taught me how to master Word, doing red lines and this and that. And then working at Goldman taught me how to master Excel, which is, that's literally all. We never even opened Word. It's like the whole time you're on Excel. So that was my initiation into the working world, was just immersing myself in that after school. And I actually loved it, even though I didn't plan on staying in those jobs. I loved my time at Goldman Sachs because I felt like it was the most incredible education, even though I'm not there today.
Well, Shahram, this has been a fascinating conversation. Congratulations on all your success, and I really appreciate you sharing your story and your career with us.
Thank you so much, Richard. The pleasure was entirely mine.
This is Richard and Shahram. Thanks.